Hi everyone, my name's Antony Cummins and welcome to this video. Right, I've got a question for you. What's the difference between the Bansenshukai and the Shoninki? What's the difference? Of course, one is written by Natori Masazumi and is pretty much one in a collection of scrolls, and the Bansenshukai is written by Fujibayashi Yasutake, and it was written around the same time, within about 3 or 4 years of each other, about 5 years of each other actually, and this one is, as far as we know, a standalone manual. Right, so there's the size difference. Of course, this is much bigger, this is much smaller, but that is very misleading in the actual reality of their internals. Right, both written in the mid to late 1600s, both by, if you want, Fujibayashi was a lower ranking samurai, or from an old samurai family who had lost their position in Iga, and Natori was not a low ranking samurai but from a prestigious family, but he himself was on low koku, low payment. But what can we say is the difference between the actual manuals? Right, first of all, the size difference. Don't be put off by the size difference. Fujibayashi uses a lot of non-ninjutsu things in his book to give you a background on ninjutsu. So the biggest example of this are the auspicious times for heaven and earth, the predicting wind, predicting rain, all the meteorology type things. There's at least 2 massive sections which are nothing to do with ninjutsu, if you want, from their origin, but which are interwoven with ninjutsu in his book. Now, in other manuals, Natori Masazumi has the same amount of information. He just didn't include them in his ninja book. So straight away, you're pulling those bits out. The end of the Bansenshukai was written after Fujibayashi, so you can pull that bit out as well. That's not even ninjutsu. So you're left, and then the beginning of it is like the history of the ninja and questions and answers about the ninja. You can sort of pull that out. That is, of course, to do with ninjutsu, but it's not ninjutsu itself. It's not technical ability. It's about the history of. The other difference, the other major difference, is that in a good way, Fujibayashi puts so much detail in. It's like, so for example, Natori says, predict wind and rain, this is good. Fujibayashi has pages and pages and sections on predicting rain. So what takes one sentence in the Shoninki to cover, Fujibayashi takes pages and pages to go through, because he explains in detail. For example, Natori Masazumi says there are multiple ninja tools. The end. He doesn't even explain what the ninja tools are, he just says there are multiple ninja tools. Fujibayashi goes through the ninja tools. So on that level, Fujibayashi is excellent because he actually describes in details using the tools, keeping the tools, storing the tools, making the tools, diagrams of the tools, which gives you pages and pages of extra information. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean Natori didn't have this information, it just means Fujibayashi wrote it down. What we do know is that Natori wrote down a lot of this stuff in other manuals. So there are illustrations of ninja tools or ninja sections in his other works and not in his in Shoninki. So the difference here is that Fujibayashi was writing you a single, in one, here's how to be a ninja. Natori Masazumi was writing you a sort of in one, overall comprehensive school in 30 so manuals, which means the Shoninki is only one manual, which means that there's some ninja tools here, there's some ninja information here, there's wind and protection here, there's magical spells here, and if you just sort of like have a look at the Shoninki, we sort of reference all those things like an umbrella in the Shoninki. So just because it's not in just because it's not in the Shoninki doesn't mean Natori doesn't speak about it, doesn't mean he hasn't wrote about it. Those scrolls will be coming out in the future. So on that score, Fujibayashi and Natori are very similar. They've both wrote a lot, but Fujibayashi is all published, ready and in English, and it was in one book. Natori is not yet published in English, will be, and is in multiple different places, being brought together by us. So they both, in their collective schools, have amazing information on ninjutsu. But there's something else. The main thing I want to talk about here is the difference in the language. Fujibayashi is very basic in his language, and not to embarrass Yoshie, but she was like some parts of the Shoninki are extremely difficult, but she says like the Bansenshukai is quite easy. It wasn't a problem. It was dead easy. The only problem was outdated vocabulary, which you have to find, which you can usually find in a decent dictionary, specialist dictionary, or if the character was written incorrectly, or there's been a transcription error and you have to like backtrack. So some of the stars and esoteric things, we had to go to the original Chinese manual and pick out the correct kanji and actually correct Fujibayashi because he got it wrong. So, which we did in our version, we corrected him with the original Chinese. So Fujibayashi is very simple, like, you know, and overly simple and easy. He just waffles on endlessly. So do this, do that. Oh, did I tell you about that? So he says the same thing about 5 times in the manual in different pages. So when you're going through it, you realise that's the same thing he's already said time and time again. So that is what adds to the bulk of it. Whereas Natori Masazumi is on the opposite scale of annoyance. He hardly says anything and doesn't explain anything. For example, he says you need the skill of Shimyoken, if you like, which is really difficult to get a definite understanding of because different people have different ideas. Shimyoken. The idea we've come across, or what seems to be the most reliable, is the fact that Shimyoken is this idea that your mind is working in such an attuned way, and your abilities are so attuned and your training is so good that you can sort of see an opponent and reflect what they are going to do and have an insight to what is happening in the world and what is happening with those, and to be able to react quite easily to something that's going on externally. That seems to be the premise of Shimyoken, but Natori Masazumi just basically mentions it off the cuff, and then, oh yeah, predict wind and rain, and oh yeah, the stars. You know, you're like, oh, there's that much. So if you look at it like this, the Bansenshukai, when he says something, has only a little bit of extra things you have to check, because he said most of what you need in there. Whereas if the Shoninki, when there's something there, it's kind of out here where you have to check. It's got so many different branches going off that you're like, oh my word, this one page has made about 50 different academic articles that I need. Just because I would say Natori Masazumi is far more sophisticated than Fujibayashi, but that doesn't in any way make Fujibayashi bad. It just means that this is a very sort of like middle class, by that's a very, for me and you, high class, that middle class samurai who's wrote in a very educated way, and a bit of somebody who's a lower class, a little bit lower, but within the same bracket, who's writing in a very simplistic way. So that's a bit of an issue when you're doing both. So reading the Shoninki, you can read time and time again and think, yeah, I get that, but actually, like simple like things like, you know, there are many ninja tools. You're like, yeah, okay, Natori, that's great, but now we have to go off and research ninja tools. Luckily, we have the Bansenshukai to show us the different ones. The last major issue is subjectivity and objectivity, if you like. The Bansenshukai is very, very simple in its directions. This is why Yoshie said it was easy. Not easy, it's easy to translate, if you will. It's easy to understand. It's because he says, do this, do that, achieve this. Step 1, step 2, step 3. There's no interpretation, really, in 90% of the Bansenshukai, if not more. So, for example, it says, when you've had dry weather, don't go in any dry leaves, especially if they're sort of going downwind towards the house you're infiltrating, because you'll go crunch, 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 and they'll be able to hear it. Dead simple, nothing like you have to really worry about in the translation. Then it says if it's been raining and it's damp, they're probably okay to walk in. Not a problem. So this is more of an instructional learning, like step A equals step B, you'll achieve C. Okay, and that's exactly how the manual goes all the way through. Go to the west, he attacks from the east. Go downwind, you attack from upwind. There's very, very simple instructions. There's just a lot of them. That's what makes the Bansenshukai quite complex, is because there's so many that interlock. But individually, they're all quite simple. However, subjectively, Natori, it's so difficult. I want to be honest now about the different people who've translated the Shoninki. I give 1000% credit to those people who've gone out and attempted to translate the Shoninki without having a Japanese person back them up. There are about 3 or 4 different ones now there. Only one of them was done before us. A second one was published before us, but it wasn't just necessarily translated before us. That was my fault. I was very, very early with our advertising campaign by about 18 months, and they just then quickly put theirs out and beat us. So we were doing it roughly the same time. So on paper it looks like they beat us, but actually I got an email saying they've started it because I've told everyone we're doing it. So oh, okay, so that was a mistake I made. But all of them deserve credit, and all of them deserve a round of applause, because the Shoninki, especially the last scroll Gekkan, is really difficult and it's subjective. What do I mean by that? I mean that it isn't simply do A, do B, achieve C. That doesn't vary. There is some of that in there, but especially when you get to Gekkan, the last scroll, it can be interpreted different ways. Of course, grammatically it says some things and you're like, okay, that's what it's saying. But like anything, in a conversation, somebody can be direct, clear and precise, and some people can be ambiguous. They can have vocabulary that allows you to interpret it. And the thing is, the Shoninki has two problems. One is that Natori uses quite a lot of vocabulary that allows you to interpret. Like I said, the Shimyoken, achieve Shimyoken. What does Shimyokenki? People seem to have different ideas of this. So in Japan in the 1600s, did everybody have a different idea of this? Or is there a standardized version? Or is there just Natori's version and then everybody else had a different version? That's just one word and you're like, oh, what did he mean by that? And what does it mean in his time? Because remember, as a translator, you can't just say, oh, it means this. No, what did it mean in their time? It's totally different what it means in their time. So for example, if someone today says that's wicked, mate, you know, it's a bit of an 80s, 90s thing, but if you went back 300 years, people would say, oh, it's evil. And you're like, no, it's good. But you said wicked. And you're like, things change. That's obviously a simplistic idea, but that's the point, is that things will change over time. So what we think it is, in another language, might be not what it was back then. And Natori isn't precise on this. And there's many more examples. I can't really think of any strong ones offhand, but there are, when I've been through it, there are so many places where you're like, he could mean this and he could mean that. One vocab example would be putting ink on the sword blade. We translated it as ink on the body, another person translated it as ink on the scabbard, but in the second edition of ours, we've decided to go with ink on the blade of the sword. So we're, I think, the first people who've said the blade of the sword, and which we think is correct now, because you've got a choice with the kanji. It's either blade of the sword or body. You know, unless somebody comes up with another theory, but that seems to be it. There's no definite idea for which one it is. The kanji could mean both. You just have to be Natori to know which one he meant, or, you know, as best we can get it by observation and analysis, and that's where we've got to. But that's one of the more difficult ones, because there isn't anything to go off. There isn't another section that talks about ink in the body or camouflage or the sword. It just literally is one sentence. So you could be reading Gekkan and be like, so for example, alright, let me think of one. Ninjutsu is a void. Ninjutsu is like running, sorry, Nimpo is like running into a void. What's that mean then? So, you know, the idea I have behind that is that, and I think we're right, but of course everybody thinks they're right, but the idea that it's a void is that it has no shape, because it says it's shapeless, it's a void, it has no shape, it's formless. And the idea is that ninjutsu changes with the mood of the people. It changes with society. It changes, you know, depending on where you need to use it. The moment ninjutsu is static is the moment it stops working in the present time. It only works in history. Now, of course, for us, we don't want modern ninjutsu at all. Anybody who says, oh yeah, you've got to adapt it to guns and all this, then that's not ninjutsu anymore. That's just you fantasizing. It can be done, but it's no longer ninjutsu, it's just modern special forces stuff. Ninjutsu has a very specific time frame. It ended in 1868. Everybody who talks about ninjutsu is talking about historical ninjutsu, or they're talking about fantasy stuff. Even though it might be correct and it might be amazing, they'll say, here you go, Antony. I've had people talk to me and say, Antony, here's a concept in ninjutsu, here it is in the modern, look at it, I've used it the same. I'm like, you're dead right, you're not wrong, you're perfectly right, but why are you using the word ninjutsu? That's a special forces technique in today. It's actually a special forces thing, because they just find parallels between the two, which is great, that's fine. It shows that historical ninjutsu was a real thing, because they're doing it in 1600s Japan, and they're doing it in 2000s USA or UK, and you're like, okay, ninjutsu is a real thing from them. But that doesn't mean what you do is ninjutsu. Do you know what I mean? So you have to be careful there. Ninjutsu for Natori had to change. But once it was past 1868, it didn't have to change anymore. It was the ended. That was that done. So what I'm trying to say here is that be aware that no matter who translates the Shoninki, there is a much, much wider section that needs interpretation. It's just that simple. I don't hide that fact in any way, shape or form. I never hide our mistakes. We make mistakes, but we tell you about mistakes, or we'll change them in the next edition, and hopefully bit by bit. So how can I say this? With Fujibayashi, when we've made a sort of mistake or I change something, it's like fixing piece of machinery, or like we fixed that and we fixed that, now the engine's working better. Clink, clink, very definite changes that make changes to the running of the engine, you know, the information. Shoninki is different. The Shoninki is like a picture that's out of focus. It will forever and always be slightly out of focus because it's too ambiguous, too subjective, and none of us are Natori Masazumi. So if we could travel back in time, pick up, you know, go to Kishu, speak to Natori Masazumi, he would say, oh yeah, change that, change this, change that bit, move that, you've got it right, you're bang on. Then we'd have a picture that was totally in focus, totally sharp. But we don't have time machines and we don't have Natori Masazumi. So what we've got is a slightly out of focus picture. I would say some of the other translations are more out of focus, not a lot, but just slightly more out of focus, whereas ours, because we've used the original scrolls, we've got the original family behind us, which doesn't really change the translation, but it gives a bit of, you know, that solidarity to it. We've got the grave, we've got the place where Natori was, gives us the feel as a foundation, and then we have 30 other scrolls to double check the meanings of the Shoninki, which do talk about the Shoninki. So when we say we're right on something, we found it in another scroll mainly, we know we're right. Because nobody else has those scrolls. I know they don't because I paid to have them photographed and only I have them. So unless they go and get paid to get them photographed, they're probably lying if they tell you they have because they don't know where they are. Right, so, and of course there's no point, we've already done it. So our Shoninki is a much tighter picture. The only problem there would be is the publisher's interference. The publisher is like, right Anthony, this footnote here, put that footnote there. Anthony, can you put that there? Change this grammar to make it flow easy, and you're like, oh, okay. So while the picture is tighter, it's actually being added onto at the edges. There's more colour in there because the publisher is like, no, add that, add this, add this. And in one way, the publisher was correct. The decision was actually, I hated it at first, but now I sort of get it because for a person who's just picking up the Shoninki, it reads much better than it does. We have the original translation. I still have on backup, and one day I would like to do that in maybe the Book of Samurai series with no added extras, everything in footnotes, everything boiled down to what it is without the publisher's interference. But from this single standalone book, I would say the publisher got it right, I think. You know, they changed the name and they got it right, and I think they did quite well because obviously the sales did quite well. So they were happy with it, we were happy with it. I just wasn't happy with the original edit. The editor in the end got, if those people who see some mistakes in this book, a few are ours, but many are the editors, because and he got fired after. I'm not sure it was directly after this, but he was fired for not being good enough. So the second edition, you'll be able to tell the second edition. See that Kamon on the back? We didn't know Natori's Kamon. That now will be the correct Kamon. So check that, and the Kamon there, the crest there, will be the correct one. We're asking to get the colour changed, but they've said no, but I'm trying to push it. So if the colour isn't changed, that Kamon will give you an idea of second edition. So only have a look for that in bookshops. Right guys, so on the whole, Fujibayashi is awesome in his detail, but simplistic in his depth. He's not so deep, he's just got lots. So imagine Bansenshukai as a shallow puddle that has small deep sections where it goes quite esoteric and deep, but it covers a very vast area. And the Shoninki is a small tiny puddle that's very deep, and if you step in it you'll drown because you're going. Both of them have amazing amounts of information, water inside. They have amazing, both of them are great historical manuals, but they have their differences in the ways I've just described. Okay, my name's Antony Cummins. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm on Instagram, follow me there, and of course, get the books and find out about historical ninjutsu. We're all enjoying it. The world is moving on. The world is moving away from fantasy ninjutsu and getting into the real thing.